Games are now the world's greatest home video games. They're only from Atari.
The Atari 2600 is a home video game console developed and produced by Atari, released in September 1977 as the Atari VCS, and was rebranded as the Atari 2600 in November 1982. By 1982, the Atari 2600 was the dominant game system in North America. Poor decisions by Atari management damaged both the system and company's reputation, most notably the release of two highly anticipated games for the 2600, a port of the arcade game Pac-Man and E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Pac-Man was panned for being inferior to the arcade version. E.T. was rushed to market for the holiday shopping season and was similarly disparaged. Both games, and a glut of third-party shovelware, were factors in ending Atari's relevance in the console market, contributing to the video game crash of 1983. Production of the Atari 2600 ended in 1992, with an estimated 30 million units sold across its lifetime. For this video, I will be looking at the 5 best-selling games for the Atari 2600. Frogger is a 1981 arcade action game developed by Konami and published by Sega. In North America, it was distributed by Sega/Gremlin. The object of the game is to direct 5 frogs to their homes by dodging traffic on a busy road, then crossing a river by jumping on floating logs and alligators. Parker Brothers received the license from Sega for cartridge versions, which it released for the Atari 2600. In television, Atari 5200, ColecoVision, Atari 8-bit computers, TI 994A, VIC-20 and Commodore C64. Parker Brothers spent $10 million on advertising Frogger. The Atari 2600 version was programmed by Ed English. Frogger was positively received as one of the greatest video games ever made. It was followed by numerous clones and several home-only sequels in the Frogger series. The 1982 Atari 2600 version sold a total of 4 million cartridges, making it one of the best-selling games for the Atari console. Pitfall is a video game developed by David Crane for the Atari 2600 and released on the 20th of April 1982 by Activision. The player controls Pitfall Harry, who has a time limit of 20 minutes to seek treasure in a jungle. The game world is populated by enemies and hazards that variously cause the player to lose lives or points. Crane had made several games for both Atari, Inc. and Activision before working on Pitfall in 1982. He started with creating a new realistic-style walking animation for a person on the Atari 2600 hardware. After completing it, he fashioned a game around it. He used a jungle setting with items to collect and enemies to avoid, and the result became Pitfall. Pitfall received mostly positive reviews at the time of its release, praising both its gameplay and graphics. The game was influential in the platform game genre, and various publications have considered it one of the greatest video games of all time. It is also one of the best-selling Atari 2600 video games, with just over 4 million copies sold worldwide. The game has been ported to several contemporary video game systems. It has been included in various Activision compilation games and was included as a secret extra in later Activision published titles. Donkey Kong is a 1981 arcade video game originally developed and published by Nintendo. As Mario, the player runs and jumps on platforms and climbs ladders to ascend a construction site and rescue Pauline from a giant gorilla, Donkey Kong. It is the first game in the Donkey Kong series and Mario's first appearance in a video game. Atari obtained the license for home computer versions of Donkey Kong and released it for the Atari 2600 in July of 1982, selling a total of 4.18 million copies. When Coleco unveiled the Adam computer, running a port of Donkey Kong at the 1983 Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, Illinois, Atari protested that it was in violation of the licensing agreement. Yamauchi demanded that Arnold Greenberg, Coleco's president, withdraw his Adam port. Greenberg complied, and the game was not published. The Atari 2600 version of Donkey Kong contains one of the longest undiscovered Easter eggs in a video game. Programmer Landon Dyer's initials appear if the player dies under certain conditions and returns to the title screen. This remained undiscovered for 26 years until Dyer revealed it on his blog, stating that there's an Easter egg, but it's totally not worth it, and I don't remember how to bring it up anyway. The steps required to trigger it were later discovered by Don Hodges, who used an emulator and a debugger to trace through the game's code. Space Invaders is a 1980 video game based on Taito's 1978 arcade game of the same name for the Atari 2600. It was developed and released by Atari Inc. and designed and developed by Rick Mora. The game is based on the arcade game in which a player operates a laser cannon to shoot at incoming enemies from outer space. Mora's version has unique graphics and offers some gameplay variations. These include a two-player mode and variations that allow for invisible enemies and moving shields, and for enemies' shots to zigzag and potentially hit players. Prior to working at Atari, Mora developed games at Fairchild Semiconductor. When joining Atari, he was impressed with the Space Invaders arcade game and began developing it in his own time at the company. The game had little interest from the staff until Ray Kasser saw how well Space Invaders was doing in arcades, which led him to get the rights to the game for the Atari 2600 and to Mora completing his code. Space Invaders would be one of Atari's biggest hits in 1980, with Electronic Games magazine referring to it as a console seller for the system. It became one of the best-selling games for the Atari 2600, selling around 6.25 million copies. The success of Space Invaders led to Atari seeking out other arcade titles from other companies to publish for home consoles from companies such as Namco and Century. Pac-Man is a 1982 maze video game developed and published by Atari, Inc. under official license by Namco, and an adaptation of the 1980 arcade game Pac-Man. The player controls the title character, who attempts to consume all of the wafers in a maze while avoiding 4 ghosts that pursue him. Eating flashing wafers at the corners of the screen causes the ghosts to temporarily turn blue and flee, allowing Pac-Man to eat them for bonus points. Once eaten, a ghost is reduced to a pair of eyes, which return to the center of the maze to be restored. Programmed by Todd Fry, Pac-Man took 6 months to complete. Expecting high sales, Atari produced over 1 million copies of the highly anticipated game and held a National Pac-Man Day on the 3rd of April 1982 to promote its release. It remains the best-selling Atari 2600 game of all time, selling over 8 million copies, and was the all-time best-selling video game for several years. Despite its commercial success, Pac-Man was panned by critics for poor graphics and sound, and for bearing little resemblance to the original game. It has been considered one of the worst video games ever made, and one of the worst arcade game ports released on the system. To keep up to date with all of the latest videos then, leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell for all notifications. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Here are some suggestions for some of my previous videos, and I will be releasing some new ones soon.